Better prospects might not begin to emerge until right about the middle of the year. No, it's March already. Pleasure to have you join us.
It's my pleasure.
Okay. And Blessed, we also have a third guest with us right at the moment. Engineer Uke Chikwendo. Chikwendo is co-founder and chief executive officer of Integrated Aluminum Company Limited, and it's the chair of the Aluminum Manufacturers Association here in the Federal Capital Territory. Engineer Chikwendo, I'm delighted to have you on the program. Okay. Well, let's begin the conversation with you. I mean, everybody talks about the challenges of doing business in Nigeria. Some of the factors in the mix are fairly well known. Some people talk about power and so on and so forth. But from the practical perspective, from your subsector in the industry, what are the obstacles to efficiency of the business environment?
Well, from my experience, knowing that I'm in the aluminum industry, my experience has been, first of all, funding. Funding is a major issue which needs to be, gotten over. Infrastructure is another one. Then government participation by government structures is a major one. Then security. In funding, what I mean is, for instance, when we started my business, Integrated Aluminum, I started it with a partner. I've been in the industry from sometime in 1992, where I worked in First Aluminium, before we started a company called Chartered Aluminium in 94. And in 2002, we decided to set up our own company. I mean, we didn't have all the money, but we did something a bit, different then, which was to identify companies who were doing business, who had, similar line in the same industry, the construction industry, who would be able to invest in us and knowing us for this length of time. So we got them to invest in setting up the company and had shares. So it's like private equity, participation. So we had about 4 of them or 6 of them then. Although a few have divested into other things. And that way we were able to set up a company, which today I believe will have 3 factories in the country. But it's been difficult, running these businesses. I know we've been downsizing or right-sizing or whatever you call it today. So infrastructure is another major issue. Infrastructure in the sense that you need roads to be in order. You need things like pipe-borne water in not really my industry, but so many other industries, and transport. Roads, we need to haulage the goods from one point to another. So you have difficulties of meeting your orders. Sometimes it's just not feasible with the kind of roads we have in the country. And when I come to government aspects, where government needs to play a major part, there's so much bureaucracy in doing business with government. There's so much issue of corruption. Thank God the government of today is their main bane, which is what they are fighting. So there are whole lots of things, unnecessary taxes. Sometimes you move a good from one point to point B, the state governments will charge you a tax. So there's double taxation in different ways, which emerges. In the FCT, for instance, you have the municipal come with taxes of tenements. You have the FCT come, with, what do they call it? Different revenues, and the FIRS and so many of them. So you need to deal with these things as they come, and still, whether you're profitable or not, these challenges are there. So these are the few things I want to, I think I should bring on board today. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, Engineer Chikwendo, just for you, before we go back to the other guests, some of the items you already explained, but when you say corruption, say in government transaction. What exactly do you mean? I mean, are you a government contractor?
Yes, apart from, yeah, I mean, we do contracts so many times with government, and you have so many issues that come up. I mean, sometimes you're required to give money ahead of you getting jobs done. So things like that come up. I mean, we all know that, even people who we have affiliated companies, which we do also contracting business. I'm a civil engineer by profession. So we have affiliating businesses also where we get contracts, So these things are like normal in the business of Nigeria today. And it is terrible, and it needs to be stopped.
All right, Engineer Chikwendo, thank you very much. Let's go down to our other guests. Of course, we introduced Professor Emmanuel Nadeze earlier. Now, Professor Nadeze, it's such a worrisome situation when we get reports like we just even received from the World Bank Index on the ease of doing business in Nigeria. And these are indicators or parameters over the years. Most of them have not changed. Why is it so difficult in these times explaining away some of these areas that are still constraining ease of doing business in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. I think you asked the right question because for over 50 years, Nigeria has been trying to diversify its economy to have a steady growth rate that will really place it on the trajectory for it to be able to fulfill its potential. And if we are not able to achieve some of those goals, then we have to, this time is no longer saying, and for us to say, we are not doing this, we are not doing that, but rather why the things that we want to achieve are not being achieved. Let me just give a very brief background. You know that in many African countries, historically, the government has always viewed the business sector with suspicion. And therefore, there was this anti-business stance that really has retarded the progress that one should have had over time. But the fundamental question is, why is it important to improve the business environment? Why do we have to make business, ease of doing business a priority? And it's just a very simple answer. If you want to have, high growth rates, economic growth rate, double digits, and for a sustained period of time, which will not only just increase incomes, but also create jobs for young people, then you need to make sure the private sector is performing its role as the engine of economic growth and employment, because that's where the jobs will come from. So if you want to do that, you will encourage indigenous businesses, you will also encourage foreign investors to come into your country and create, businesses, small businesses, big businesses that will actually be the engine that you want. So this is the reason why this is extremely important. Nigeria has found itself for over 50 years lagging very seriously in the area of ease of business. And so we need to change this mentality of anti-business stance and be pro-business. What do I mean by that? We can talk about infrastructure, we talk about security, we talk about everything. But we need to ask ourselves, fundamentally, has the mindset in the government or in the public sector changed vis-a-vis the way they view business? The president or the vice president can say one thing. Well, go and look at those working in the bureaucrats who are working there. Look at, somebody told me once when I was talking about the collapse of businesses in the southeast and so on and so forth, and he was telling me, he's a transport person, he says, by the time my buses leave from Owerri, before they even get close to anywhere else, they've been stopped so many times by police people extracting all kinds of rents from them. That is, they are doing everything to sabotage his business, when this is actually, in real economies where businesses flourish, everything you do is to facilitate business to move forward, not to really to prevent it from moving forward. So, I have more details to provide, but let me just say that everything borders on what kind of tone that is set at the top. This is a pro-business, and how we build the capacity of all the people who are linked with business, whether it is for registering businesses, whether it's for facilitating whatever it is, so that they can be working in tandem with the spirit and the philosophy that has been developed at the top, facilitating the business from happening. Because if we don't do that, in this global world where the competition is very high, Nigeria can never be competitive. So that for our brother who is a business person here, to be able to export any goods or services that they have, they're not going to be able to compete with others where the countries have put these kinds of things together.
Well, Professor Nadozie, thank you very much for your perspective, but let's explore it a little further. And before I put my question, I would like to recap two comments made by two separate guests on two different topics that we have dealt with, all surrounding the issue of either doing business in Nigeria or dealing with the aviation subsector, Nigeria's troubled aviation subsector. A very experienced, airline pilot as well as an operative indicated, for instance, that so a couple of years ago, while Aero was seeking a license, to operate from Nigeria to some other country on the west coast, the levy on it was 10 million naira. The airline had not flown one passenger, but was being asked to put down 10 million naira. No basis for that charge. Now, we've also had on the program, it's also a regular face, Mr. Muda Yusuf is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And he did say that it would appear that government proceeds against business in Nigeria with the objective really of making those businesses, even before the business, have had an opportunity of growing. Now, what you have touched on, would appear to be a shift in terms of appreciation of precisely how we is doing business in this country, the philosophy, the economic philosophy. Why are we still frozen in the mindset of the command economy, where government had control and then the bureaucracy, also knew how to allocate resources, where allocated resources X, Y, Z, and continue to now maintain an anti-business perspective? Why have we remained frozen in this? And are there examples elsewhere on the African continent where there has been a paradigm shift?
I think when you have a mindset that has been established for a very long time, you need a fundamental change in that mindset to be able to liberate yourself from whatever is really preventing you from doing that. If you look carefully at the Nigerian Constitution, as a scholar, I've really asked myself, to what extent is the Nigerian Constitution an enabler of development? Is it a constitution that is, because a constitution cannot just be a legal document. It has to be something that a means towards achieving higher ideals. And everything that says government will do this, government should do that, government should do this and that. If you look at the constitution of Kenya or South Africa, you find that it's a living document that is prepared by the people, and people can read and understand it. So there are such kinds of fundamental issues where you find that the country has not really addressed some of these issues. And as I mentioned as well, the leadership itself has said one thing in public, but the real thing that's happening on the ground is totally different. So what has happened in Ethiopia, in Rwanda, in many other places, in Mauritius, it's just that what I have said, that the leader has come to say, I have a vision. For instance, we can have a vision of saying Nigeria has to have been ranked number one in terms of ease of doing business in Africa. It's not a pipe dream. It's a goal that this country can set for itself. And then say, how do we do that? Well, bring the business people together to ask them, what are the problems? How do we solve the problem? Bring other experts. And then we start to set some milestones to say, between now and 5 years' time, we must deal with X, Y, Z thing. We must make sure that when we educate our bureaucrats, that they understand that their even very survival and revenues that they have to get depends on how the private sector is thriving. So for me, I see that we have more or less treated this as a theoretical issue rather than a practical issue of bread and butter, whereby we understand that if you have youth unemployment as a very serious problem probably the number one problem this country is facing and many other African countries are facing. The way to solve that problem is not by all kinds of short-term food for work or whatever it is. Fundamentally, how you solve it in a sustainable manner is to ensure that you have a vibrant private sector that is really the engine of economic growth, that is really creating the jobs that you have. So for me, I think we cannot get away from this kind of situation.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Not nowadays. Let's again continue along the tack that Professor Nnadozie has indicated. For well over 20 years now, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, of course, private sector, has been engaging with government, seeking to break down various barriers. Is it the case that the obstacles remain pretty high and intense and deep-rooted, that we still have this mindset persisting with regard to an anti-business posturing by government at all levels, local, state, if not federal as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. I cannot agree less with my colleagues here. The prognosis on the doing business environment definitely is quite grim, and which essentially was the reason why the NESG came together in the first place, to begin to engage government. And in engaging government over time, it took us quite a while to get government to begin to understand some of the issues that we are talking about now. And the executive first came on board. They started looking at policies that needed to be touched. But in the last 2 years, we have made some good progress in engaging government in this direction. And that is through the National Assembly. Because one of the things we found out was that in addition to policies, in addition to the paradigm shift, there was a need to review relevant legislations that have a direct effect on the business environment. We identified 54 acts, 50 bills, and a number of provisions in the Constitution, like he talked about, which we believe needed to either be repealed, amended, or bills enacted. And fortunately for us, we got a National Assembly that was committed to working with us in the NESG, and we created what we call the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable, which is a partnership between the National Assembly, the NESG, the MBA section on business law, and supported by DFID through their Enable 2 program. Enable means enabling business environment. And through that platform, a lot has been done in the last 1 year in reviewing legislations. One of the things we convinced the National Assembly to do is to reform the process of bill making on business environment related legislations. You cannot sit in the National Assembly, rely on the clerks to draft a bill or amend a bill that is intended to improve the business environment when you are not a business owner, or you are not in the private sector. And the National Assembly accepted. So what we now have is, when we are done with the public hearings where everybody will come and make submissions, we always set up a technical committee of experts from the private sector, from the government, that now fine-tune all those submissions and continue to produce bills that are now fit for purpose. Because, like he said, if we do not get it right within the business environment, if we do not get it right as a private sector-led economy, all the projections about creating jobs, boosting economic growth will continue to be a mantra. And it is actually possible. You talked about other country examples. During the last economic summit, we had a session on doing business. And we invited the people from Rwanda. Rwanda has been a major success story in the doing business scale. And this is a country that, as recently as 1994, was involved in a civil war that virtually ravaged the entire country. Right now, they jumped the indicators in leaps and bounds. And what did they do? First, like he talked about, leadership. The President Kagame led from the front. He became known as the champion of doing business reforms. Then they collapsed all the agencies that have things to do with the private sector into one, called the Rwanda Development Board, that reports directly to the president, and got somebody from the private sector to lead that. And within a matter of four years, Rwanda had leapfrogged the indicators. Now, when we talk about doing business, there's the ease of doing business. There's also the cost of doing business. Because sometimes, the World Bank indicators talk about ease of doing business, electricity, getting electricity, land registration, and all that. But there's also the cost of doing business, where Engineer Chikwendo talked about access to finance for businesses. These are part of the legislation that we have all worked on. We are working on one on credit bureau. We are working on another one on secure transactions for movable assets, so that SMEs can use their movable assets as collateral to access credit. We're also working on an independent warehouse regulatory agency, so that you can use your warehouse receipts also as collateral to access credit. So these are some of the, because I told somebody something the other day. What we are now trying to do is what he talked about. Go to the foundation, shake up the fundamentals, and begin to see where results will come from. The federal government, they've set up the payback, which we saw during before we started this interview, chaired by the vice president. They have a secretariat, and I mean the kind of information we get from there, they're doing good things there now. For instance, take the CAC. One of the indicators of doing business is how easy is it to register a business and exit, wind up. So now they've reformed the CAC to the extent that we now hear that one, they've put everything together in registering the business into one form, so you don't have multiplicity of forms now. Secondly, you can now do your search online, so you don't need to go and pay a lawyer to do a search for you. So all of those things we hear are happening, and they sound good to show that eventually government is now listening. But I have to also join in underscoring the point that, one, the leadership is saying the right things, but hopefully, as we begin to make progress in the work we are doing, what I can say, the rank and file, the bureaucracy itself will definitely need that paradigm shift to understand that this economy, if it must be built on the private sector, it has to do with what the bureaucracy is doing. One of the things we are considering is, if you know that there's some laws that mandate regulatory agencies to either issue licenses, approve tariffs and all that. So you could apply for a license, and then you will have issues moving from one table to the other. We are exploring the possibility of doing what is done in INEC, where when you apply to be a political party, and you've met all the requirements, after 30 days, if you don't hear from them, you automatically register. So we are trying to look at, in some areas where when you apply for a license, you have a 30-day period. Once you've met all the requirements, after 30 days or any number of days, we will agree. If you don't hear from them, automatically take it that is a yes. So we hope that when that happens, the civil servants and public servants will now know that you don't have to keep somebody's file in a drawer and wait for him to do this or that, that after a particular number of days, automatically he takes it as approved.
All right, Mr. Ode, it's good enough you made mention of your collaboration, or that's NESG position with NASBA, as long as it's going to work. Aspects of this legislation, some of them are key priorities that we must quickly look into, especially looking at the World Bank Index report. Earlier on, Engineer Chikwendo also raised some issues. I'm sure maybe those areas of legislation, I don't know how much priorities or key priorities you are trying to make this engagement be for us to quickly start seeing results.
Like I said earlier, we had identified 54 acts and 50 bills. Then out of those, we have about 13 we've called priority legislations. The Company and Allied Matters Act is one of them. Investments and Securities Act is another. Then the Competition Bill is one, because we don't have a competition bill in Nigeria. So it's one of them. That has reached, is approaching third reading now in the Senate. Then we have the infrastructure-related bills, because Engineer Chikwendo talked about the challenge of infrastructure. Exactly. Now, if you listen carefully to Mr. Trump, American president, 2 days ago, he talked about a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure that will be funded with a mix of public and private capital. We have not yet got to a point in Nigeria where private capital is driving infrastructure development, and it is because of the legislations that are not encouraging those sectors. So we are dealing with about 5 sector legislations: roads, railway, ports and harbour, and inland waterways. In addition to that, we're also dealing with a legislation to create a National Transport Commission that will be the regulator of the sector, that will then create an environment for the private sector, because the private sector, to invest in infrastructure or any business, needs to understand the regulatory environment. So one of the things we found out was that the regulatory framework to encourage private sector was either non-existent or weak. So those are the priority bills that we are working on, to create that regulatory framework to encourage the private sector, and also to make the regulatory framework not be seen as a revenue generation drive. Because one of the things we found out before now was that the regulatory agencies turned themselves into another obstacle and believe that they have targets like banks. So we are working on the legislations to let them know that the key task of a regulatory agency, one, is to provide a framework for regulation, and also sector development. I always ask, for instance, take the airline industry now. Our airline industry in Nigeria is in a mess right now. Apart from Aero, we don't have an airline that has been in business for more than 15 years in Nigeria. Then, what is NCAA doing about it? Are they making it an issue to bring to government? Last week or 2 weeks ago, Mr. Trump invited airline owners to White House. What are your problems? How do we? When Obama became president, he invited automakers. What are your issues? What are your challenges? So the regulatory agencies also need to understand that it is their mandate to focus on sector development, because yes, you can create good regulations, but if the sector is not growing, if you are not encouraging a situation where people can even build private airports to enable movement of goods and services, people cannot invest in railway to take away the goods from the roads, and people cannot invest in inland waterways, because we rely so much on the roads, but there are different modes of transportation that you can move haulage, and it's done all over the world. So, and those things are not happening because, of course, government revenue, government funds cannot develop those sectors. You need private sector, but private sector will need to understand that the right regulatory environment is in place to encourage them, and that is the core of what we are then doing. And of course, we're also looking at certain aspects of the Constitution, for instance, the Land Use Act, the Minerals and Mines Act, and then taking away railway from the legislative list, and all of that. So it's a comprehensive work that we've undertaken, and we are quite impressed with the progress we're making so far.
Okay.
No, thank you very much. Again, we'll come back to explore further aspects of ease of doing business. We have our viewers already sending in their own comments. Dayo Isaac Ojediron has this tweet. The government seems to be trying to tackle this issue, that's the issue of ease of doing business, but actually nothing is changing. We need better and more business-friendly policies.
From Festus Akimboyewa, said not everyone will do business in a chaotic environment. Government should make starting business easy and guarantee access to credit facility.
And Ayuk, lack of basic infrastructure and multiple taxation have made business difficult in Nigeria. Government mindset must change.
From Abu Malik, says do away with corruption, bring forth friendly business policies, and the equation is balanced.
And Festus Akimboyewa, it will be easy to do business in Nigeria if government simplifies our tax system, cuts taxes, and broadens the tax base and makes paying tax easy.
From Dele, Jack Solomon says, my moderators, government should therefore strive to enhance its business friendliness and generally improve the business climate.
Okay, well, let's return to Engineer Chikwendo. Engineer Chikwendo, one of the issues that Nana was talking about has to do with the conflation of regulation with revenue generation by a number of MDAs. In fact, business chambers do complain about this. What has been your experience? I mean, do you find regulators seeking to help develop or grow the subsector, or they are more interested in imposing all kinds of regimes of control, and more importantly, getting revenue from the operators in the subsector?
Yeah, thank you. If I look at the situation I see, for instance, in Abuja operations, we have, like the municipal, for instance. The municipal contract to probably, there must be estate agents to value properties and charge you tenement rates. I mean, these people, what is their interest? Their interest is probably get a percentage of how much they charge you. So the tendency is that they are lured towards charging you higher rates. So there's no real criteria of putting these figures in place, so that everybody feels there's some fairness in such operations, and there has to be some synergy in charges of taxation, for instance. I've had situations where we take goods from from a location of FCT to probably a location of the Niger Delta, for instance, just because you can't stock right, in one factory. Because we have an operation in Port Harcourt, but sometimes you probably require some clients who needs a light gray beige of 0.7 or 0.9 material thickness, in that area. So you have to produce here and move it to that end. And now you have to do some haulage from crossing about 5 states. And every state will demand you to pay, have their what do they call it? Their stickers, which you have to buy. So these are things that, if you do not have it, maybe it's your first time of going on such a trip, you're stopped, you're stalled, and your delivery time is stalled. We've had incidences of, even deliveries of materials to major things, maybe like church programs of maybe like a Redeemed Christian Church of God. We've had an incident like that, where they had a camp to have the general overseer was supposed to come sometime in November of a certain year. And we had a truck, because of bad road infrastructure, we had it, fail on the highway. And we had to do, transload and so many other challenges. So it's really terrible. I just hope that what Nana Ode has said about, drawing these policies in place and being able to legislate, correct the legislation, would help. Because it's not what an individual or a private company can do, because it needs a whole lot of resources to lobby and have that clout to even get into the political drama, which is happening today.
What are some of the most irritating menaces you face from the subnational governments, that is the state and local governments?
Well, the major menaces you face are things like issues of power, For instance, power is some major thing we fight with every day. It's something we have alternative power lines. Diesel is not cheap, so if the private companies which are giving distribution or power generations are not able to give us power, this deters the production we're able to do, and the hurdles we have to go through, in delivering locally too, is another menace, in the sense that, even in FCT, you have to have maybe your pickups or your trucks have those registrations which are meant to, deter you from moving from point A to B. So it's, they are different in different industries, but these are few for my own aluminum industry.
All right, Engineer Oke Chikwendu, co-founder and CEO of Integrated Aluminum, would like to thank you for being part of our discussion this morning.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, it's still Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
Don't allow this thing to disgrace me.
It started with a race over nothing and something. Soon, the race became an issue. But what issue is an issue when the reason for the issue is not an issue?
People just they run for time. I don't know what they pursue them. Why would they run now?
Somebody tell me, why should I run?
Join us in 100 meters this week on Professor John Bull. Another refreshing episode of your rib-cracking comedy and social satire.
Hello there.
Showing at 8:30 p.m. every Tuesday and Friday on NTA Network, International, and Star Times.
Are you people safe? Hey.
Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
Welcome to the new speed of life.
Okay, sir. You may now go in for your interview.
Thank you.
My shoe. And to think I just bought this very expensive foreign shoe 2 months ago.
So sorry about your shoes. This is why I advise my friends to always patronize made in Nigeria products. See this shoe. It's made in Nigeria and I've had it for 2 years and it's still as good as the day I bought it.
Made in Nigeria products are good quality, and stringent government regulations and certification now mean the goods made in Nigeria meet international standards. Make the patriotic choice today. Buy right. Buy Made in Nigeria.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
The attention of the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, SGF, has once again been drawn to the nefarious activities of some criminal elements in the society who have devised yet another devilish method of defrauding unsuspecting members of the public by impersonating the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Engineer Babachir David Lawal. They seek monetary gratifications from their victims who, as usual, they are sure of employment in the public service or outright political appointments. Department of State Services, DSS, and other security agencies have been informed and are working assiduously to curb the occurrence of this ugly phenomenon. Some culprits have indeed been apprehended. For the avoidance of doubt, some of the numbers they used are as follows. Members of the public are therefore hereby advised to be aware of fraudulent callers impersonating the SGF and indeed other top government functionaries. The general public are once again reminded that the federal government of Nigeria has established verifiable channels of communicating with individuals, groups, and organizations. If in doubt, contact the press unit, Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Shehu Shagari Complex, Abuja, for clarifications on all matters of public concern. Bolaji Adebiyi, announcer.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're still discussing ease of doing business, looking at the philosophical underpinning as well as legislative reform, which is work in progress at the moment. We just signed off the aluminium producer, that's Engineer Chikwendo. We have been joined now by another guest, Dr. Evans Dirisu. Dr. Evans Dirisu is a financial advisor and tax consultant. Dr. Dirisu, a pleasure to have you join us on the program.
Thank you.
Okay. But let's get your initial comments on the implication of the tax regime that we have in the country today in the mix of ease of doing business. How much of a burden is this, and how can we begin to break it down from the local government, taxes, levies, and all kinds of charges that businesses face in the country?
If you will recall, even the Presidential Enabling Committee, Business Enabling Environment Committee, a few days ago, talked about creating an environment that enhances the growth of businesses, especially the small-scale and medium-scale businesses in Nigeria. And we are well aware that taxes are some of the inhibitions to development of businesses in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, the World Bank report, Doing Business in Nigeria, 2017, highlights that the cost of collecting and administration of taxes in Nigeria, its impact on business is so enormous, and in fact, it raised Nigeria on the scale of 170 out of 190 in its 2017 reports. These taxes are very numerous. They start with the fees you have to pay at the commencement of business. When you are registering your business, starting business, you pay certain fees to Corporate Affairs Commission, and thereafter you have, if it's a, let's take a small-scale incorporated company, they will have to prepare taxes at the end of the year, pay companies income tax. They also have to enroll in payment of taxes for their employees under the PITA, that is Personal Income Tax Act. They also have to pay, in certain cases, registration fees, business registration fees, premises registration fees in some states. So there are so many multiple taxes. some administered by the Federal Inland Revenue Services, others administered by the Joint Tax Board, and as a matter of fact, it will do well for us to imitate the developed economies where globally taxation is being simplified such that you go online, you fill a form, and you do self-assessment, your tax returns is filed, and then you pay, you are assessed, and then you pay your tax. Nigeria has of recent tried to do online tax assessment, but the fact is that you still have to go to the service points for the Federal Inland Revenue business, and that is an area where I think the Joint Tax Board has a lot of responsibility to ensure that the multiple taxes, which are federal, state, local government councils, and some levies that are obnoxious, I think the Joint Tax Board has to do something quickly too in order to ensure that these multiple taxes are brought to the barest minimum. On the other hand, the government relevant tax agencies have a responsibility to advise and enlighten taxpayers. They have to bring in a lot of taxpayers into the tax net, but they will have to enlighten them. Go out and get these taxpayers, create service points such that small businesses will realize what business returns they have to prepare at the end of the year, and these have to be simplified. It is true that there is no uniform format for preparing taxes for small-scale businesses. This has to be developed in conjunction with professionals such that to keep books of accounts, proper books of accounts, see in a simplified manner. These days there are some manuals which you can use for keeping small-scale businesses. I think we need to work on reduction of these multiple taxes so that we don't kill our businesses in their embryonic state.
All right, Dr. Dirisu, thank you very much. Again, we'll come back to you. Professor Nnadozie, let's explore what, you don't say it's required for us to get the regulators, the government, to have a pro-business disposition. Now, they also mentioned the rush of pieces of legislation that have been worked on in terms of seeking to change what exists in the law. But you also indicated that, look, you have provisions of the Constitution that prescribe government as the leader of the business environment. Will change, repeal, amendment, or otherwise of the law suffice in changing the mindset of those who ultimately will enforce the laws?
No, actually, there are three things in my view. Number one is the issue of legislation, policy, and regulatory regimes. These are important. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient, actions that can change the situation. In other words, what I'm saying is it is important to have the right investment policy in place, which I believe Nigeria probably has not been neglecting for a while, because part of the issue about infrastructure development and the rest of them, if you really want to deal with it, you need to, as my brother Uday said, you have to think about private investment, and a lot of them will come from outside. And the investment policy has something to do there, rather than just simply pursuing loans. So putting that in place and ensuring that there are things that will enhance rather than inhibit domestic investment, foreign investment, and the entry, survival, and growth of businesses, whether they are small or whatever, is really something that is important. So that's number one. Making sure that you have the right regulatory environment and you have the right policies, whether they are investment policies or there are business-friendly policies or overall policies in general. So both the National Assembly and the executive they have a major role to play there. The second dimension is in the area of what I call advocacy and support. There is no place in the world where you have had a private sector that's thriving where they did not get any support from the public sector or the government. You know, it's a misnomer for people to mistakenly think that it's just simply sufficient to say you have deregulated the environment, you have done some reforms in the financial sector, it's easy to get credit to do all the rest of them. You mentioned an example of a Nigerian airline trying to expand, and it was, you know, inhibited by another country. I think Nigeria has
inhibited by the regulatory
industry, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, to
loophole
go.
the regulator.
Well, this is basically killing the goose that is going to lay your egg, and maybe trying to, you know, extract the egg from it. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. That the mentality that has happened and the mindset that has developed over time, where we used to tax agricultural exports, you know, so that you can get the revenue. But instead of knowing that if you don't tax it, you're going to get even more revenue. So my point is that if we understand that the government, although it should not be in the business of business, but rather the government has a central role to play. Even your commentators mentioned this. Because if it doesn't play its appropriate role, then you cannot see the private sector or the businesses being able to play their role. So their role is not to just simply see the business as, you know, a source of extraction, where it can just basically say we tax you to death, but rather,
So I'm sorry to interject, Professor Nadozie. That's nowadays you've been, of course, interacting. The NESG has been interfacing with the public sector. How much, if we are to attain this paradigm shift, what kind of injection of reform do we need into, for instance, the public sector, the Bureau of Public Sector Reform, in terms of getting the orientation? Do we have a plenitude of civil servants who can readily grasp this new idea and say, look, the way to go is not to hobble business, but to facilitate business, from your interactions with the public service?
Well, I mean, to be honest, we don't. The civil service and the public servants still see themselves as policemen of businesses. As I mean, they still see the private sector as the ugly face of capitalism. You know, so that, I believe, should be a core mandate of the Bureau for Public Sector Reforms. But why we started with legislations first is that let us have a situation where when you break the law, you are a lawbreaker. Hopefully, we intend to also engage with the, because we talked about the executive, we talked about the legislature, we also want to engage with the judiciary. So when the laws are simplified, and that's major of the work we're doing to ensure that the laws are simplified. So you break the law, you know you've broken the law, and somebody can then go to court and expect the judiciary to take action. If we get to a point where a public servant or a civil servant is actually convicted of breaking a law that inhibits the business environment, that might be a way to begin to send the right signals. But clearly, the Bureau for Public Service Reforms need to have it as a core mandate to re-educate the civil servants and the public servants on the role of the public service in economic growth. That's a conversation that I have not heard, and it's a good thing you've mentioned it. We haven't had that conversation. The public service identifying that it has a key role to play in driving economic growth. That's one point. Another point I wanted to also, another area we're having some difficulty in engagement is with the states. All of this we're saying is at the federal level, but every business is a tenant of a state. And you find that the governors have not yet, they don't get the optics. Not talk of the local government chairman if they exist in any state at all. And we need a broader conversation that cuts through the tiers of government. The federal government can try create all these laws and all that, but if the states do not understand that they are the landlords of every business, the Land Use Act gives all the land to the governors. So if you want to set up a business, you want to build a factory, you are likely going to rely on the state to make the land available. We want to have that changed. But in this thing, I must also tell you that the states have been a major hindrance to the
so what
business
kind
environment.
of a narrative are we pushing towards the states? Because even the federal government is looking towards taking a drive through most of the states. We've seen them, the N-Power and some other MSSEs that are ongoing, pushing through the states. What kind of narrative are we getting, and what kind of feedback in implementing what is being pushed out for the federal?
The feedback is not very positive. I mean, the government, until we begin to see the results, because some of these points you've made are just at the infancy stage. But, I mean, with our engagements at the subnationals, the feedback is not really very positive. And that's where the point Prof made about advocacy. We may need to have to scale up the advocacy to the point of blackmail, you know. And then we also might need to do some bit of peer review, because now we are talking about the doing business environment by the World Bank, reviewing countries. We might need to also begin to review states and begin to find states that are more friendly to businesses, throw up the numbers and indicators to show that, because, I mean, with ICT, if I find that I can do business comfortably in Yobe and run through ICT to be connected to the rest of the world, I might as well move. It happens in developed societies. You find that people identify locations where it's easier to do business, and they move there. Right now, we are stuck with Lagos, we are stuck with Port Harcourt, and maybe Kano, one or two other areas like that. But we need that peer review mechanism. It was there before, up to about, I think, 2010, but somehow it stopped, because the governors, from what I heard, didn't like the fact that those indicators were making them look as if they were not performing. Yes, they were not performing, but politics set in, and somehow those rankings stopped. But we need those rankings to identify the states where it's
as you just indicated, I mean, in the U.S., for instance, business registration or business incorporation, by the way, I mean, states seek to compete to get the most favorable laws, you know, for businesses to incorporate in them. And one of the leading states of gas is the state of Delaware, where most businesses, you know, troop to get registered. But
and I remember one time, to support the point you made, I remember one time I was in New York and I saw an advert by Texas in New York television, telling them how easy it is to do business in Texas. Because, of course, they know New York is a business territory. So they were running ads on TV.
In New York?
In New York, telling them the progress they have made to encourage businesses to come to Texas. And I found that quite amazing.
Is there, Charlie, before we come back to Dr. Durisu will also like to get your views on this, but Professor Nandozie, you see, when a guest, you know, on Good Morning Nigeria, as today we are having today, discuss the occurrences at the subnational level, oftentimes, you know, the comment is unflattering. Is there a problem or a challenge that we face that we haven't actually taken head on with the management of the political economy at the subnational level? Look, governors have power. They are some of the most powerful political actors you find in the country today. At some point, they were picking and choosing who will be president of the country. Local governments, you know, have enormous power. They collect, as the saying goes, their money from FARC. Very little accountability goes on. And then, of course, they go around, as businesses have indicated, you know, collecting all kinds of levies and taxes. And yet, they do not appear to be acting as critical factors in the growth and development of businesses, in, you know, reducing unemployment and so on and so forth. How do we get this right? And they'd say, look, we now have ease of doing business.
Yes, actually, that was going to be my third point. Because there are two, and then I had a third one, which is the issue of coordination, and issue of the role of the subnational units when it comes to promoting a pro-business environment and ideology. In other words, that what is happening at the federal level should also be, you know, supported at the state level and at the local government level, and they have to all speak the same language. But you see, the challenge that we face in Nigeria is that every state is guaranteed some sort of revenue that will keep it alive, and therefore there's no incentive for it to, you know, say, listen, I've got to mobilize revenue for us to stay in power. internally, which means you have to allow businesses to function, and if they function, you get more revenue from taxes, and you're able to provide the services that the government does. So, and this is precisely what is happening. We've seen an example from Lagos State where they've recognized that, you could actually mobilize a whole lot of revenue without depending on the federal government. So that fiscal federalism is something that we need to look at again, and find a way to say, well, states that want to really function, as has been said by my colleague here, that if you have to look at where you are ranked in terms of the ease of doing business. But there's a danger in that as well. There's a race to the bottom, because there'll be all kinds of tax incentives and tax breaks that people want to give to bring businesses to do their...
What's wrong with that?
Well, that's not a problem. There's also a laxity in regulations, environmental issues and safety issues that one has to keep in mind, that each state will be competing with each other to say, here, we don't pay attention to if you're a polluter or if you are causing all kinds of labor issues and so on and so forth.
But wouldn't that then be the responsibility of the national government to say, look, if you are having that kind of unhealthy competition, as it were, at the subnational level, then you have the national government that says, no, listen, these are the acceptable minimum standards.
Well, yes, but how enforceable is it, and how binding can that be at the subnational level?
That's why you have pieces of legislation.
I agree, but so far we have all sorts of regulations that are supposed to be making business easy, but we see that what is happening in Abuja is different from what is happening in New York or somewhere else. That they do their own thing there, no matter what. But I'm not completely ruling out the need for competition and competitiveness among the states. It's actually very, very healthy and very encouraging. But I'm just simply saying, in doing that, we need to make sure that we also have the safeguards in place so that we don't have a race to the bottom, or we don't really have either the workers and environment suffer as a result of that. So I'm all for making sure that we see so that businesses can actually know where they have to go to be able to really have things happen. So I'm really off.
All right, Professor Nadozie, Ude, Dr. Dirisu, we have some tweets already in as well. We'll quickly take a run through them, and we'll continue our discussion. From Unique Collection, said the federal government should discourage mafiaism, whatever, by big shots who dominate and monopolize business, and policies should be stiff for foreign companies.
Now, Mike Ayakwa tweets, doing business in Nigeria is an economist's nightmare. Governments at all levels should be helpful in this regard for economic growth.
From Dele Jack Solomon, I'm of the view that to achieve these targets, strategy should be directed at improving critical regulatory areas that have declined.
Seidu ML tweets, now double or multiple taxation is one huge problem. It makes it seem as though one is being punished for running a business.
Seidu continues, there are simply too many unnecessary restrictions that serve to discourage potential businesses. They need to be watered down.
Well, Dele Jack Solomon says to achieve a dramatic improvement in the ranking for ease of starting a business will entail having a seamless registration. Well, that's one aspect that Nana Ude has already talked about. Well, gentlemen, let's take a look at this. The Presidential Ease of Doing Business Council identified 3 broad areas of intervention. One, entry and exit of goods, entry and exit of persons, as well as reform of governmental processes and accountability. The mindset wasn't included in that. And, gentlemen, you've already touched on what is required in terms of changing the orientation. But is there a risk if we are merely looking at changing our ranking position to say we are 169 now, which is dismal, and you want to climb up to say the first top 10 or first top 20 or 25 without actually affecting the way businesses are run? I'm asking this question against the background of probably an issue that we also are familiar with. In terms of economic development, Nigeria has more of the informal sector than the formal sector. And ease of business comes much more regularly into conversation when you are dealing with the formal sector. Are we now making the transition from business informality to formality, and therefore coming into this tension where you're also having the mindset, as been discussed by the guests, of civil and public servants who believe that capitalism is evil, even though, you know, the Berlin Wall and communism collapsed in 1989. Dr. Dirisi, take a shot at that.
Well, the council you referred to earlier mentioned exits and entry and exit of goods, exit and entry and exit of persons, and transparency. To my mind, transparency is one of the greatest factors among those three factors mentioned. The point is that, in my view, we have so many regulations, and I will even say we have too many regulations. And these regulations are used by people who are supposed to implement them to create empires for themselves and then see these entities as revenue-generating units. Take, for instance, ITF is supposed to be training, the fund is supposed to be deducted and used for training people, artisans, and all the other people. Because if you note, the productivity of labor in Nigeria is very, very low. We have very low productivity. Our managerial capacity is also a lot of suspect. Otherwise, ask why our airlines, why are they failing? Is it managerial issues? Are they failing because of managerial issues? Are they failing because of the tax imposed on them? For instance, I think that the airlines are made to bear a lot of taxes. That is an issue which I think is responsible for one of the reasons for their failing. But the other thing too has to do with the regulatory authorities in that industry. So we find that many people leave undone what they are supposed to do and pursue collection of revenue, creating fiefdom for themselves, and creating pockets of power and where they could bully people. Look at tourism. We, from time to time, talk about developing tourism in Nigeria. But can you imagine if you were visiting this country for the first time and you're on the highway and you find apart from the potholes, you find that security agencies go to where there are worse potholes to stop vehicles, to check vehicles, to bully people. If you were visiting this country for the first time and your idea is to see the country, will you want to return to a situation where you are harassed? So I sometimes wonder whether we are serious when we talk about trying to make money from tourism. When we talk about enabling environment, an enabling environment should be such that it will be easy to start business, it will be easy to access credit, it will be easy to get permits for building your warehouse, it will be easy for you to transfer property when you are purchasing one property from another. It will be easy for you to enforce laws, to enforce contracts. If you enter into contract with another party, it should be easy for you to know the terms of this contract, and enforcement issue should be constant and consistent. Again, policies, the policies that government develop, are they consistent? Are they constant? Are they somersaults? I mean, it's amazing if you're talking about new legislations. I think there are various legislation, but what we need to do is transparency, discipline, and enforcement of what we have. Simplify the processes of doing business. Take an example, banking. We create a lot of room for the banks to make too much profit. In fact, for not working at all. In overseas, if you are opening an account online, you are encouraged by being paid higher interest rates, because by more people opening bank accounts online, you are helping the banks not to open up more branches where they will have to put in logistics and other incidental costs. But here in Nigeria, you are charged for trying to open a bank account online. The consistency of your access to internet not even guaranteed.
All right, Dr.
You see, I think a lot of things we have to do is a change of mindset. That paradigm shift has to take place, starting from leadership, as somebody made mention earlier.
Okay, Dr.
The civil servants and all these agencies which are supposed to enhance.
They need to change mindsets. That is what we're trying to do. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Dirisu. Okay, Mr. Day. Now let's take a look at some clear-cut ideas in areas of implementation, as well as the resolve to actually harness all these things that we've talked about all day from every one of you. What do we need to do as quickly as possible?
First of all, we need to do what needs to be done. Just get it done. And doing it is not rocket science. A number of, like the previous guest said, one of the things we are doing actually is not just in enacting new legislation, but in reforming existing acts. Is that I need to make that point. We are working on 54 acts to simplify them, to make it easier to be implemented. That's one. Secondly, we also need to have provisions that punish offenders, both within the public service and the private sector. I don't know the last time a public servant was convicted for breaking a law that had to do with enforcement of regulation. So we also need a stronger judiciary, a more efficient judiciary, not just to deal with contracts, but also to be able to give confidence to the average Nigerian that who will now be able to understand these laws when we simplify them. And when a public servant or a civil servant tries to do anything to inhibit his business, then he can go to court and get judgment.
What about the way around? It's not just civil servant now, soliciting. What about those patronizing them to actually, okay, I will induce you. Do we have areas of those ones too being punished?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's why in saying what I said, I didn't talk about it. I said both the public service and the private sector. But I also wanted to make a key point, or the question he asked about the informal economy. Because we've had this discussion and we're only talking about the formal economy. We will want a situation where you formalize the informal economy, which is another reason why we are talking about this simplification. One of the incentives is access to finance. By the time we are able to create the credit bureau, by the time we make it easier for you to access credit through warehouse receipts or movable assets, we hope that that should encourage most of the operators in the informal economy to get formal, then broaden the tax base. And one point the Prof made earlier on about states generating revenue, we also need to understand that generation of revenue should be a function of economic growth. When we look at revenue generation as states, let it always be a function of economic growth. Thank you very much.
Professor Nnadozie, your closing thoughts briefly.
Thank you very much. I'm in the business of capacity development now. And as the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, we have looked at issues across the continent. Why are some countries moving forward and others are not? Whether it's in terms of the ease of doing business environment or in terms of actually being able to implement their very fancy strategies that they have to achieve results. And we have found that what we characterize as soft capacities are far more important than the other human capacity, institutional capacity, infrastructure investment.
What is soft capacity?
Soft capacity is leadership capacity, is change in mindset. And so I began this discussion by saying that there needs to be a change in mindset. And this change in mindset is something that I believe if we, let's congratulate the government for looking at a few areas that they think are important. Those areas are important, but it's only a beginning. If we don't deal with the fundamental issue of making sure that the right tone is set at the top by the leadership to say we are a government that is pro-business, we are going to support business unashamedly, we will be advocates for businesses, we will actually support them like everywhere else that is, in the world. And we will fight for business and set that message, set the tone at the top, and set it right across the whole spectrum of government, national, state, and other. Thank you.
Economics and Development Expert, and also the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you very much.
I also like to thank Nano Day of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Dr. Eva Zirisu, Managing Partner of a chartered, also a chartered accountant and a tax practitioner, financial advisor, and consultant. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Now to our complimentary segment.
Yeah, let's move over to our sports desk to get some sports stories.
Coach of Nigeria Super Sand Eagles, Audu Adamu, has expressed confidence that his team will be ready to face Group B opponents Mexico and Italy at the 2017 FIFA Beach Soccer World Cup in Bahamas in April. This year's Beach Soccer World Cup is slated for 27th April to 7th May. In the draws that was held on Tuesday, the Sand Eagles were drawn in Group B alongside Mexico, Italy, and Asian Football Confederation champions. Reacting to the Super Sand Eagles group opponents and their chances, Audu said he believes his team has enough experience to do well at this year's Beach Soccer World Cup. And in tennis, Andy Murray saved 7 match points in a 31-minute second set tie break before beating Philip Kohlschreiber in the Dubai Championships quarterfinals. The world number 1 needed 8 set points to edge the German 2018 in the tie break and level the match. It was the longest tie break on the men's tour since the 2007 Australian Open.
I cannot believe that shot. Match point down, and Murray comes up with an astonishing drop shot.
Meanwhile, Nasarawa United defeated Akwa United 1-0 in Thursday's Week 11 Nigeria Professional Football League clash at the Lafia City Stadium. Adamu Hassan was the hero for Nasarawa as he scored the only goal in the 34th minute to give his team the win.
Sport now to the foreign scene.
In response to America's visa rules affecting citizens from 5 European Union countries, media reports says U.S. citizens should be refused visa-free access to the EU as well, stated by the European Parliament. Citizens of Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, Poland and Romania are currently denied visa-free access to the U.S. The European Parliament passed a non-binding resolution on Thursday. However, member states will have to approve the move, a process that could take years. The resolution, however, passed a show of hands, noted that the new visa rules should come into effect quickly and should remain in place until the U.S. visa requirements were put on hold. A statement by the European Parliament stated that the EU Commission was legally obliged to temporarily reintroduce the new visa rules to reciprocate the policy. In January, President Donald Trump have attempted to introduce a travel ban on people from 7 majority Muslim nations, but it was blocked in the courts. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe's High Court has banned corporal punishment for children both at school and in the home, following the ruling of the High Court after a parent complained that her 6-year-old child in grade 1 had deep bruises of a beating by a teacher. Media report says if upheld, it will transform the way parents discipline their children for centuries in the southern African country. While some parents are criticizing the ruling, other rights groups say it is long overdue and such corporal punishment breached Child Rights Act. Justice David Mangota agreed that corporal punishment for children was unconstitutional and said that parents and teachers should not lay their hands on children even if they misbehave.
Next for us is the weather report.
Hello viewers, my name is Paul Ugba and I welcome you all to the weather forecast. Maximum temperatures have continued to rise across most parts of the country as we approach the peak of the hot season in March. Yesterday, values reached 41 degrees Celsius over places like Sokoto and approximately 40 degrees Celsius over places like Lokoja, Lafia, Makurdi, and Abakaliki. And for Friday's weather forecast, we still anticipate a high level of discomfort from high temperatures arising from sunny and hazy conditions in the north, partly cloudy as we move to places like Abuja, with high chances of localized thunderstorms along the coastal areas and the high ground areas of the southwest. And for our maximum temperature forecast, please stand by.
Well, enough sunshine for Abuja. That's what we expect. That's Good Morning Nigeria for today, and indeed for the week. We hope to see you Monday, 7 a.m., God willing. My name is Blessing Abu. Thank you so much for watching. Do enjoy your weekend.
All right, and I'm Kingsley Osadolo. Blessing says enough sunshine for Abuja, of course, in addition to baking heat. We thank you for being with us today and indeed for all of the week. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day and, of course, have a pleasant weekend. Bye.